From the station that made country music famous, 650 AM WSM, this is a Coffee, Country, and Cody podcast. Hi, it's Charlie Mattos, and in this episode, we sit down with David Nail. This was recorded January the 21st of 2020. David had just released a terrific new EP entitled Oh Mother and was getting set to go to the Grand Ole Opry. Enjoy our Coffee, Country, and Cody podcast. Some really great stories with David Nail.
Right. You heard it on 650 AM WSM, WSMonline.com, our app download. Watching on Circle Television, country plays here, and so does David Nail. As you hear that, what memories come back?
First of all, I sound really young, but primarily a funny story. My wife is actually the girl in that video. We had zero budget. She did it for free, and she had a little bit of acting experience, like, you know, in high school or something. And there's a scene, one of the first scenes where she gets out of the car and she starts yelling at me. I remember, like, you know, they don't go over any instructions. It's just like, hey, yell at him. And I remember she got out of the car and she just started screaming at me and was yelling all this stuff. And I just started dying laughing. I looked at the crew. I was like, this is exactly how it is at home. She's not acting at all. But I was amazed at just how, like, quickly she went into character, and realized then and there that, you know, the actual star in the family was my wife.
Aw, that's so nice.
But you had been on a journey to this point in your career when Red Light comes along. I mean, you had been here working on it and things not happening like you wanted them to, and then all of a sudden it does.
Yeah, you know, Red Light, I think it was on the radio for 40-something weeks, maybe even 50. Wow. My wife and I were getting ready to be married in that June, and I can remember we were already living together. I know that's frowned upon in the South. Trust me, it was at my house as well. But and there were nights where I would roll over and I'd just be like, man, you know, if this doesn't work out, are we still going to get married? Just because I joke and say it's because she went to Ole Miss, so she's a little snooty.
Hotty toddy.
But, you know, that's a lot. You know, I could just there's tons of things running through my head. You know, I could just imagine, like, her parents, you know, you're giving away your daughter to this guy who's, in essence, failed multiple times in the music business. So what in the world is he going to do? He's got no college degree. And so I was definitely feeling a lot of pressure, but it was one of those songs that, believe it or not, they always said, I remember, I'm going to name drop here, but I remember Luke Bryan telling me one time, he goes, man, there's a difference between when the song goes from 40 to 30, and there's a difference from 30 to 20, and when it gets to 10, it's amazing. He goes, you'll realize, I mean, you'll just be able to see it, you'll be able to feel it, the amount of mouths in the crowd that are actually singing the right words. And I remember once it got, you know, probably in the top 15, obviously it was something I'd never experienced before, but I was like, you know, this might have a chance. And I'll never forget the week after it fell off the chart, I think it went to 6. A guy who will remain nameless in radio told me, he said, you know what, this is a #1 song. It's just been on the chart for too damn long. And I was like, I don't know if that makes me feel good or bad.
Wow.
But at that point, I wasn't being greedy, because my philosophy, even to this day, is always, you know, I hope I have a good enough year this year to have a next year.
Exactly.
And I knew at that point I was going to be able to work another year.
Mm-hmm.
So this woman that is your girlfriend, that you have asked to be your wife, did you at any point go, but if this thing does happen, you realize I'll be gone all the time?
Yeah, I tell her all the time, because, you know, I guess for the last 2 years we haven't worked near as much as we did there for about a 3 or 4 year span.
Yeah.
And now with 4-year-old twins, really when they were born is kind of when I began to slow down. And last year there was about a 2-month period of time where we got pretty busy. And I remember just her scrambling. She just didn't know what – she was like, what do you mean you're going to be gone 3 days? What do you mean you're going to be gone for a week? You know, like, what am I going to do? And I was like, you know, I told you that from the beginning, that if I ever have to, like, you know, work like that again, you're going to have to wing it, you know. But I wouldn't say that it's a lot easier now that they're 4 and they somewhat listen. It was much more difficult when, you know, she was sleeping about 3 hours a day when they were first born, and that first year we were just kind of winging it. I always tell people, for some reason I took off for 2.5 months when they were born, and I just no one told me that number. For some reason it just sounded right, appropriate. And I can remember that week before we went back on the road, and we were both like, what in the world made me think that this thing would be in order in 2.5 months and you'd be able to handle this thing? And I just remember the look in her face and her eyes being so big, thinking, God, I'm glad my parents moved here.
Joe, do female artists have to think about it more than male artists, this whole thing about having children?
I would say yes.
And how it's going to change your career?
For sure. And I'm sure there's a lot of political correct stuff that I don't know what to say and what not to say, but yeah. And I don't know why. I mean, maybe it's because we carry them around for 9 months and there's just more, I don't know if the right word's responsibility, but absolutely.
Oh, I think there is, sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Definitely. I know that firsthand because there's lots of moments where I'm irrelevant, My kids, I can't help them in any way. It's mama. I need mama. And I can only imagine if you're an artist and you have all these demands on your time, and you feel that pull of, well, my kids need me at home, and at the same time I need to be doing this for work. I mean, I can't imagine. I would say it's much more difficult for a woman.
Well, and you start to remember things that you hadn't thought about in 30 or 40 years. Like suddenly you care about school closings. For 40 years, I didn't care about school closings. Now I got a 6-year-old. I care about school closings.
I remember about 3 or 4 months after my kids were born, and I was literally going, thank goodness we live a mile away from one, but I was going to Target about 3 or 4 times a day. Literally the clerks knew who I was. And they knew it was always diapers or some sort of toy or something just trying to get through. And I remember stopping. And I have a confession. Sometimes I would actually pull into the Target and maybe catch 15-minute nap. Go home and tell my wife, hey, there was a long line. But I remember calling my best friend from back home and going, it was just I had this revelation, and I called him and I said, I just realized that I will never for the rest of my life make another decision selfishly. I have to worry about these 2 children. I have to worry about my wife. They will affect every decision, whether it's where I go to lunch, if I work today, when I go to bed at night. I mean, every decision revolves around them, and that's a pretty heavy moment.
David Nail, Jo Smith, Charlie Mattos. I'm Bill Cody, and this is Coffee, Country, and Cody on 650 AM WSM, WSMonline.com, our app download. And our television home is Circle TV, Circle All Access. Type in your zip at WSMonline.com. It'll tell you who the affiliate is in your market area. David's on his way to the Opry Saturday night, and new music, the new EP, Oh Mother. We got music from that soundtrack, from that album coming up, EP coming up.
Coffee, Country, and Cody on WSM.
We welcome back David Nail, Nail Nation. Please take note. He is live in studio with us this morning. All over the world at WSMonline.com. App download to your smartphone, 650 AM WSM. Type in your zip at WSMonline.com, and it'll tell you where the affiliate is in your market area for Circle TV, our television home. And we'd love to know who you are and where you live and where you listen to Coffee, Country, and Cody. And David in studio on the way to the Opry Saturday night, which I know is one of your favorite, most nerve-wracking places on earth to play. You always turn to me if I happen to be hosting and go, Bill, can you bring me some water? I've got the worst case of cotton mouth that any human could ever have out here on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. It happens every single time.
I remember, for whatever reason, after I'd played it probably 5 or 6 times, thinking, all right, surely, I'm going to be comfortable. But just to, prepare myself, I was pounding water backstage. And that just happened to be, the first time that I got asked to play 3 songs. And I'll never forget about halfway. And it's amazing. I mean, I have diagnosed ADD, so it's always amazing to me the things that run through my head while I'm singing songs, especially in a moment like that. And I can remember, in the middle of the second song going, man, I really need to use the bathroom. And for some reason, and this is a true story, I remember Vince Gill telling me, not to name drop again, but he was just like, man, if you just go on stage and make fun of yourself, like, it just makes you feel so much better. So I told the crowd, I said, hey, I just want you to know I've had a ton of water and I really need to use the bathroom right now, but before I can, I have to sing a third song.
I remember it. I can see it as you're telling it, retelling it. I can see the whole thing going down from side stage at the podium.
And now it's like, you know, it's just like, I don't want to say frustrating, but it's like I've always said, you know, you sing these songs a million times and never have that sensation, and you're 3 lines into a song and you're like, why is my mouth like, what physically is happening right now that there is zero moisture in my mouth?
Where did it go?
And you just feel
where
like
else in my body would it go other than my mouth?
You feel like such a goober. You're like making all these faces. I remember there have been times where like my upper lips like stuck to my teeth, and you're just thinking like, it's like frustrated. You're like upset. You're like literally like mad at the moment because you're like, I'm here at this amazing place. You know, I should be worried about all these other things. Instead, I'm trying to figure out if the people in the front row can see that my upper lip is stuck to my top of my teeth.
Before we get to the new EP, and we are Oh Mother and a song called Forgiveness, we want you to sing. Joe wants to take you back to Target for just a moment.
I just wanted to let you know that if you guys decide to have more kids, there's a new Target app, and you can just drive up and they bring your stuff to your car. I tried it out the other day. Amazing.
Look, when you are at Target, like, I would love to see our bank statement.
It's awful.
Oh, they'll send it to you at the end of the year. Mine does anyway. Particularly if you put it on a credit card, it'll send you a statement of what you've spent your money on.
But I just remember, like, you know, you talk about times changing. I can remember before I had, you know, a business manager and stuff, and I would get bank statements, and I can remember when I was probably 25, I remember getting one time, and it was like 20 tin roofs and like a BP gas on one sheet. And there were like days where it was like 3 tin roofs in one day.
For people who don't know, that's a restaurant here in town, the Tin Roof.
I wasn't necessarily going to, you know, eat food there so much, but they do in fact serve food.
Give me a
but
setup.
Now here we are 20 years later or 15 years later, and it's like, no, it's replaced by Target. You know, Target is my new tin roof.
Give me a setup on Forgiveness from the new EP. David Nail, if you just joined us.
This is a song that I probably wrote about this time last year, and I randomly walked into the kitchen one night, and my wife was talking to a childhood friend of mine, and I was like, okay, what in the world is this about? I was actually kind of nervous. I was like, I hope she's not just decided to like tell all these like stories from my childhood randomly after 10 years of marriage. But she was calling to tell a story about somebody that we had grown up with that had fallen on some hard times and maybe made some decisions that weren't, you know, necessarily reflective of how we were raised, where we were raised. And it was just, you know, it was one of those things where I just couldn't get it out of my head. And I knew that eventually I would probably write a song about it, but literally the next day I remember sitting down and it just fell out. And I got to a point about 3/4 of the way through where I was a little stuck, and a guy by the name of Donovan Woods, who I'd become a really big fan of from Canada.
Been a guest on the show.
Had come down, and there was a song on his most recent record that was similar. And I just said, hey, I feel like this is something that you obviously went through, can I identify with, and I'm kind of stuck at how to kind of wrap this up. And he actually refused to write it at first. He just said, man, you're 75% of the way done. Like, I just feel bad. And I just said, look, man, I've looked at these lyrics for a month and nothing's happened. And, you know, I guess, you know, it sort of comes from maybe a negative time in this person's life. But you always hear those stories about people at the lowest points in their life, or if they're sick or something really negative is going on, it's kind of, they come to Jesus, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's really what I wanted to write about. You know, it's, hey, if you haven't found forgiveness, whatever that is for you, now would probably be a pretty good time to figure it out.
David Nail, if you just joined us, he's got a new EP. It's called Oh Mother. And so when we're out of time on the television side of this break, we'll hold on that, Charlie. We'll come back to it after the break. Super Bowl. You were saying that you had been chastised through social media because you're from Missouri. I mean, that was the only association you had with the Kansas City Chiefs, but people just assumed you were the enemy.
8.5 hours away. I've lived here for 20 years. I didn't grow up a Chiefs fan, but, and I will say this, I've always been very quick to say that, there's nobody that's more proud to be from Missouri than me, so I get it.
But you grew up closer to the St. Louis side. We were talking about your sports interests growing up. So what was your hometown?
When the Titans, Kennett, Missouri, it's in the southeast part of the state, only about 3.5 hours west of here. But when the Titans played the Rams in the Super Bowl, I'd lived here for about a year, and I was nervous going into that game. There's something about when you move somewhere and you live. Obviously, I was getting it in the paper. I was hearing about it on the radio. I was a young adult. I always tell people I was paying taxes here, so I felt like a Tennessee resident.
And you were a big sports fan growing up. Huge. And a baseball player. So.
And I remember being nervous about not knowing who in the world I was going to root for, and I ended up rooting for the Rams. But it was like a super heavy moment of just like, hey, man, this is powerful. I mean, I remember tearing up when the Titans won and ended up going to the Super Bowl. I knew even at that young age that how significant of a moment that was for the city.
David Nail, Oh Mother is the EP. It's available Apple Music, Spotify, and you're going to hear music from it coming up here on Coffee, Country, and Cody. On the other side of the break on 650 AM WSM. At 10 this morning on Circle Television, we are followed by Soundstage by the Wallflowers. They'll be up today on Soundstage at 10. Authentic America travel show with Nan and Charlie Kelly. That's at 5 Central Time tonight. 5:30, the Southern Weekend with Natalie Stovall. And CMA Songwriters at 6. That is highlighted by Grand Ole Opry star Darius Rucker. More with David Nail after a break.
I can't lie, it's hard to hear after all we shared, after all these years.
David Nail. That's Forgiveness. It's on the Oh Mother EP. It is available wherever you buy or download music. And you're going to share that this weekend, Saturday night, with Cottonmouth at the Opry.
Should be interesting.
At the Ryman Auditorium. He will be there, in case you missed that story a little bit earlier. You were asking about, you've been following these celebrity wives on Instagram.
Yeah, we have the Country Music Wives Club on the show.
Yeah.
Because if you really want to know what's going on with the guy country music stars, you got to follow their wives. You get the inside scoop.
I will say, she told me the other day she did this charity event a month or so ago for the homeless here in Nashville, and a couple. There was a Predator's wife was involved, a Titan's wife, and then a few singers' wives, and I just in passing one day, I'm walking to the house and I hear her say that Thomas Rhett's wife, I probably shouldn't say this, but...
Oh, Joe follows her.
Thomas Rhett, a post from Thomas Rhett's wife is worth like $25,000.
That is so crazy. I don't doubt it.
And I just stopped in my tracks, and I'm like, who comes up with that number? It's like,
what does that even mean?
You know what? I was actually kind of thinking maybe 17.5, but 25K. Hey, shoot! If you're going to pay it, why not?
Good morning, Lauren. If you're home and your husband's out on the road, and you think I charge a lot? Yeah. Wait till my wife sends an Instagram message. $25,000. I heard it with David Nail. His wife told him, and he told us on 650 AM WSM.
You got to hold those tweets and Instagram messages cash in your pocket. You're like, God, man, I really want to tweet something, but I don't know if I want that 25 right now. I may need to save it for Christmas, You
can follow David, all his social media, of course, the usual places, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You told a beautiful Gene Watson story off the air a little bit earlier about being this wannabe artist who was in town, and were you living or working on this side of town? What was the story?
I was working at one of the boot stores, one of the 30 boot stores that were out here back then.
What year was that?
It had probably been the fall of '98.
Okay.
I grew up in this small town, and I wanted to be a country music singer, and I didn't know then that records at the time came out on Tuesday. I just thought, hey, when you released a record, it showed up at Walmart. And so I literally would go every day. I would starve myself at lunch. My parents would give me $5 a day, so every 2 days I could go to Walmart and get a new cassette tape. Well, after a while, there's not this influx of records being released. I guess in November, before Christmas, I was probably buying tons of them, but when I had everything, I would just take a chance, and literally my decision would be based on the record cover. Mm-hmm. And so when I moved here, I thought, well, I want to be a country music singer, so I have to dress like one, which means I need boots, and I even bought a cowboy hat for about a week. Still have it. Ironically, Red Akins signed it at a show one time. I was wearing it. Keep coming back to the Akins. Full circle story there. But I remember I was so mesmerized by, I just wanted to be around it all the time. And I remember just driving around the little souvenir shops, and I think I just thought that, somebody was just going to walk out and, hey, you look like a singer, you want to sing for me? Maybe I'll give you a record deal right here and there. But I remember going in one of those places and just seeing this Gene Watson cassette tape. And I always tell people, when I got into country music, it was, the 90s when, the huge boom. The difference between me and most people then is I was so obsessed with it that I was like, okay, well, this is popular in 98. What was popular in 88 and 78, 68? Yeah, and that's when, when I moved here was really when I kind of started to find the Merle Haggards and the Waylon Jennings, and just really dove into that time frame. And so, I remember then, that was before the internet. So, it was me and my little 94 Pontiac Grand Am, when I heard, got no reason now for going home for the first time. So, I love those moments, and even when I go back home now, my grandfather still got a 97 Ford, and I'll say to my wife, hey, let's go dig up some cassette tapes and go cruise the gravel roads, we used to 30 years ago.
Well, you mentioned 68 and 78 and 80. Well, I'll tell you what was popular in 2013, David Nail. Thanks for coming to see us this morning. This song on its way to number one on 650 AM, WSM's Coffee Country.
Listening to our Coffee, Country, and Cody podcast. Our digital program director is Jay Patrick. Our digital producer is Haley Hall. Marketing and promotions director, Nicole A. Judd. General manager of 650 AM WSM is Chris Kulik. I'm Charlie Mattos. We'll see you next time on our Coffee, Country, and Cody podcast.